"You slept with him?" said Kimmel in a shocked manner, his voice slicing through the tense air of the green room like a blade. The question wasn't just a query, it was an accusation, a grenade lobbed into the heart of a simmering feud. Jay-Z, slouched in a leather chair, froze, his eyes narrowing to slits, the weight of the words pinning him like a spotlight. The room, a cramped backstage cave at Jimmy Kimmel Live, pulsed with the kind of silence that screams louder than words. Was this betrayal? A setup? Or just another Hollywood game gone too far? The truth hung heavy, a storm cloud ready to burst, as two titans of fame stood on the edge of war. What did Kimmel know, and why was he dragging Sean Combs, Diddy himself, into this mess? The answer wasn't just personal, it was a scandal that could torch reputations, unravel legacies, and expose secrets buried in the shadows of power. Jay-Z's jaw clenched, his gold chain glinting as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees like a predator sizing up prey. "You got some nerve, Jimmy," he spat, voice low, venomous. "What's this, huh? You trying to play me on your little show? Think you can throw dirt and walk away clean?" His words dripped with menace, each syllable a jab, daring Kimmel to flinch. The rapper's hands balled into fists, knuckles, whitening as if he could crush the accusation with sheer force. Kimmel, usually the king of smirks, wasn't laughing now. His face was stone, eyes blazing with disgust, not fear. "I'm not the one playing games, Sean," he shot back, using Jay-Z's real name like a slap. "You think you're untouchable? You think those parties at Diddy's don't leave a trail? I heard things, man. Things that make my skin crawl." The green room felt like a pressure cooker, the walls closing in as the two men locked horns. A couple of staffers lingered by the door, pretending to shuffle papers, but their ears were glued to the fight. Kimmel paced, his tie loose, sweat beading on his forehead. "You were at those mansions, weren't you?" he pressed, voice rising, sharp as a prosecutor's. "Diddy's parties, all that champagne and excess, and you're out there preying on young guys, kids barely out of their teens. You think that stays quiet forever?" The accusation landed like a punch, raw and ugly. Jay-Z's face twisted, a mix of rage and something else, guilt, maybe, flickering in his eyes before he smothered it with defiance. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled, standing now, towering over Kimmel. "You're fishing, trying to make a name off my back. You're nothing but a vulture in a suit." Kimmel didn't back down, stepping closer, his voice a hiss. "Don't play the victim, Sean. I got a call last week. Someone who was there saw you at one of those nights in the Hamptons. Said you were all over some kid, barely legal, while Diddy laughed it off like it was nothing. You think that's a coincidence? People talk, man. They always talk." The air crackled with hostility, every word a spark threatening to ignite the room. Jay-Z's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You believe every sob story you hear? That's your evidence? Nobody looking for a paycheck?" But his bravado wobbled just for a second, and Kimmel saw it, pouncing like a shark smelling blood. "It's not just one story, Sean. It's a pattern. You and Diddy running those parties like your personal playground. You think Beyoncé knows? You think she'd stand by you if she did?" The mention of Beyoncé was a low blow, and Jay-Z's eyes flashed with fury. He stepped forward, close enough that Kimmel could feel the heat of his breath. "You leave her out of this," he snarled, finger jabbing at Kimmel's chest. "You don't get to say her name, not like that." The room was a powder keg, the tension so thick it choked the air. A staffer coughed nervously, breaking the spell for a moment, but the two men didn't blink. Kimmel's voice dropped, cold and deliberate. "I'm not the one dragging her into this, Sean. You did that when you decided to play dirty at Diddy's freak shows. You think you're a king? You're a coward hiding behind money and fame." The words were a knife, twisting, deep, and Jay-Z's silence spoke louder than any comeback. For the first time, doubt crept into his stance, his shoulders sagging just a fraction. Kimmel saw it, and his lips curled into a grim smile. Yeah, that's right. You know I'm not lying. And tonight, on my stage, the world's gonna hear about it. The stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live buzzed with a restless energy. The audience's chatter a low hum as they waited for the show to start. Backstage, the fight had spilled out of the green room, trailing Jay-Z and Kimmel like a shadow as they moved toward the set. Jay-Z's stride was heavy, his face a mask of barely contained rage, while Kimmel walked with purpose, his jaw set, eyes fixed ahead. The crew scattered, sensing the storm brewing between them. A producer tried to brief Kimmel on the night's rundown, but he waved her off, his focus locked on the man behind him. Jay-Z's voice cut through the chaos, low and dangerous. You think you're gonna bury me out there, Jimmy? You think you can just throw this out and walk away? I'll ruin you first. The threat hung in the air, sharp and real, but Kimmel didn't turn around. Instead, he stopped at the edge of the stage, his back to Jay-Z, and spoke without looking. You already ruined yourself, Sean. I'm just the guy who's not afraid to say it. The accusation about Diddy's parties, those infamous nights of excess in sprawling mansions, had cracked something open. Kimmel had heard the stories, whispers from industry insiders about Jay-Z's behavior, preying on young men who were too starstruck to say no. The rumors weren't new, but the details were sickening, a pattern of power misused under the haze of champagne and Diddy's laughter. Kimmel's source, a former assistant who'd worked one of those parties, had been shaken, describing a night in Miami where Jay-Z had cornered a young aspiring model, barely 19, in a private room. The kid had left in tears, and Diddy had just shrugged, calling it part of the game. Kimmel's stomach turned at the memory of the call, the assistant's voice trembling with fear and guilt for staying silent too long. Now, standing on the precipice of his show, Kimmel felt the weight of exposing it all. Jay-Z wasn't backing down, though. He stepped closer, his voice a growl, almost drowned out by the crew's clatter. You're a nobody, Jimmy. A talk show hack who thinks he's a hero. You don't get to judge me. You don't know what it takes to stay on top. His words were laced with arrogance, but there was a tremor beneath them, a crack in his armor. Kimmel spun around, his face inches from Jay-Z's, his voice a quiet blade. I know what it doesn't take, Sean. It doesn't take exploiting kids who don't know better. It doesn't take hiding behind your empire while people get hurt. The audience's applause for the warm-up act filtered through, a stark contrast to the venom in Kimmel's words. Jay-Z's eyes darkened, his hand twitching like he wanted to swing. You're crossing a line, he said, voice barely above a whisper. You don't know what I can do to you. Kimmel's laugh was sharp, humorless. What? You gonna send your lawyers? Your boys from the old days? I'm not scared of you, Sean. I've got nothing to lose. You? You've got everything, and it's all built on lies. The producer reappeared, her voice urgent, warning them the show was 2 minutes out. Kimmel ignored her, his gaze locked on Jay-Z. I'm giving you one chance, right now. Come clean, or I'll do it for you. Jay-Z's lip curled, his silence deafening. He turned away, pacing like a caged animal, his mind racing. The stories were out there, he knew it. Fragments of truth mixed with whispers, but he'd always buried them with money, charm, or threats. Kimmel, though, wasn't bending. The host's eyes burned with a righteous anger, fueled by the thought of those young men used and discarded, their dreams twisted into nightmares at Diddy's parties. The stage manager's voice crackled through a headset, calling Kimmel to his mark. The host straightened his jacket, his face a mask of determination. You made your choice, Sean, he said, turning toward the stage. Now live with it. Jay-Z grabbed his arm, his grip tight, his voice a snarl. You do this. You're done. I'll make sure of it. Kimmel yanked his arm free, his voice cold as steel. You're the one who's done. The world's gonna see you for what you are. He walked out to the stage, the roar of the crowd swallowing the moment, leaving Jay-Z alone in the wings, his empire teetering on the edge of exposure. The curtains parted, and Jimmy Kimmel stepped into the spotlight, the crowd's cheers washing over him like a wave. He flashed his trademark grin, but it was tight, strained, his mind still burning with the confrontation backstage. The set was bright, the band's upbeat tune clashing with the fury in his chest. Jay-Z stood in the wings, a dark silhouette, his eyes boring into Kimmel's back. The host gripped the edge of his desk as he sat, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down like a boulder. Tonight wasn't just another show, it was a reckoning. The audience, oblivious to the storm, clapped as Kimmel launched into his monologue, his voice steady but sharp, each joke laced with an edge that made the crew exchange nervous glances. He didn't waste time. "We've got a big show tonight, folks," he said, pausing for effect, his eyes flicking toward the wings. "But before we get to our guests, there's something I need to talk about. Something serious." The crowd quieted, sensing the shift. Kimmel leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice dropping to a grave tone. "I've heard stories, ugly ones, about things happening in this industry. Things people like to sweep under the rug. Powerful men, untouchable men, doing things they shouldn't, things that hurt people." The audience murmured, confused, but Kimmel pressed on, his words deliberate, like stones dropped into still water. "I'm talking about parties, the kind of parties where the rich and famous play by their own rules, where young people chasing dreams get caught in traps set by men like Sean Carter." The name hit the room like a shockwave. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the camera panned to Jay-Z, still in the wings, his face a mask of fury, frozen in place. Kimmel didn't flinch. "Yeah, I said it. Jay-Z. You know him as a legend, a mogul. I know him as someone who's been dodging the truth for too long." Backstage, a producer hissed into her headset, trying to signal the control room to cut to commercial, but Kimmel was relentless. "I got a call, not long ago, from someone who saw what happens at those parties hosted by Sean Combs. Young men, barely adults, lured in with promises of fame, only to be used by men like Jay-Z, men who think their power gives them a free pass." The crowd was silent now, the air heavy with shock. Kimmel's voice grew sharper, his anger spilling out. "You think you're a king, Sean? You think you can just take what you want? Those kids trusted you. They trusted Diddy. And you both betrayed them." Jay-Z stepped forward, his silhouette looming larger, his voice booming from the shadows. "You're lying, Jimmy. You're making this up for ratings." The audience gasped again, heads whipping toward the wings, where Jay-Z's figure was now visible, his fists clenched, his face twisted with rage. Kimmel stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and turned to face Jay-Z directly. "You want to talk lies, Sean? How about the lies you told those kids, telling them they'd get a record deal, a shot, while you and Diddy laughed behind their backs? How about the lies you told your wife, your fans, yourself?" The crowd was on edge, some shouting, others frozen as the two men stared each other down across the stage. Jay-Z took a step onto the set, ignoring the stage manager's frantic gestures. "You're a dead man, Jimmy," he snarled, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "You think you can say this and walk away? I built this life. From nothing. I won't let you tear it down." Kimmel didn't back off, his voice rising to match. "You built it on their backs, Sean, on their pain. You don't get to play the victim here." The tension was electric, the audience caught in a tug-of-war between shock and fascination. A security guard moved toward Jay-Z, but Kimmel waved him off, his eyes never leaving his target. "You can threaten me all you want," he said, his voice steady now, cutting through the chaos. "But the truth is out. People know, and they're not going to let you hide anymore." Jay-Z's chest heaved, his eyes wild, but for the first time, he didn't have a comeback. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of boos and whispers, as Kimmel stood tall, his words echoing in the silence that followed. The show was spiraling, but Kimmel wasn't done. He turned back to the audience, his face set, ready to push the knife deeper. Kimmel faced the audience, his heart pounding but his resolve unbreakable, as the cameras rolled on a show now teetering on chaos. The crowd was a sea of wide eyes and hushed whispers hanging on every word, while Jay-Z stood at the edge of the stage, his presence a dark cloud. Kimmel's voice cut through the tension, steady but fierce, as he leaned into the microphone. This isn't about gossip, folks. This is about accountability. Men like Sean Carter, men like Sean Combs, they've been running their game for years, thinking no one would dare call them out. Well, I'm calling them out. The audience erupted, some cheering, others shouting in disbelief, as Kimmel held up a hand to quiet them. I've got names, dates, stories from people who were there, who saw what happened at those parties. Young men promised the world only to be used and thrown away. That's not power. That's predation. Jay-Z's voice exploded from the side, raw and ragged. You're full of it, Jimmy. You think you can stand there and preach? You're a clown, a nobody trying to tear me down. He stormed onto the set, ignoring the security guards now hovering nearby, his finger pointed at Kimmel like a weapon. The crowd gasped, some standing, phones out, capturing every second of the meltdown. Kimmel didn't budge, his eyes locked on Jay-Z's. You're the one tearing yourself down, Sean. Every time you walked into one of those mansions, every time you took advantage of someone's trust, you dug your own grave. The words were a hammer, each one striking harder, and Jay-Z's face twitched, a mix of fury and desperation. You got no proof, he spat, but his voice cracked, betraying him. You're just a loudmouth with a vendetta. Kimmel stepped closer, his voice low, cutting like a blade. Proof? I've got a kid, 20 years old, who says you cornered him at a party in L.A. 2 years ago. Said you promised him a deal with Rock Nation, told him to follow you to a back room. He trusted you, Sean. He looked up to you. And you used him. The audience was dead silent now, the weight of the accusation sinking in. Jay-Z's chest heaved, his eyes darting to the crowd, then back to Kimmel. That's a lie, he said, but the words were weak, hollow, and the crowd sensed it, their murmurs turning to boos. Kimmel pressed on, relentless. It's not just him. There's another from a party in New York, another in Miami. They're scared, Sean, but they're talking now. And they're not alone. Jay-Z lunged forward, his voice a roar. You think you can destroy me with stories? I'm bigger than you, bigger than this show, bigger than your pathetic little crusade. But his bravado was crumbling, his hands shaking as he gestured wildly. Kimmel didn't flinch, his voice calm but unyielding. You're not bigger than the truth, Sean. You can't buy your way out of this one. Not anymore. The crowd roared, some chanting Kimmel's name, others shouting at Jay-Z, the room splitting into chaos. A security guard finally stepped in, placing a hand on Jay-Z's arm, but he shook it off, his eyes wild with panic. You're gonna regret this, he hissed, but Kimmel just shook his head, his face grim. No, Sean, you're the one who's gonna regret it. You should have stopped years ago. The show was a runaway train now, the producers scrambling to regain control. But Kimmel wasn't done. He turned back to the audience, his voice rising with conviction. This isn't just about one man. It's about a system that lets people like him get away with it, that looks the other way because of fame, money, power. But not tonight. Tonight, we're saying enough. The crowd erupted again, applause thundering through the studio as Jay-Z stood frozen, his empire cracking under the weight of exposure. Kimmel's eyes met his one last time, a silent challenge, before he turned back to the cameras, ready to carry the fight forward, no matter the cost. The studio was a battlefield, the air thick with the aftermath of Kimmel's words. the crowd's roar still echoing as the cameras panned across their stunned faces. Jay-Z stood rooted at the edge of the set, his silhouette rigid, the weight of the accusations pinning him like a spotlight. His eyes burned with defiance, but the cracks in his armor were undeniable, his hands trembling at his sides. Kimmel sat back at his desk, his face a mask of steely resolve, ignoring the frantic signals from the producers to cut to commercial. The audience was on its feet now, some cheering Kimmel's courage, others shouting at Jay-Z, their voices a chaotic blend of anger and disbelief. The host raised a hand, silencing the crowd, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. This isn't about tearing someone down for sport. This is about giving a voice to people who've been silenced, people who trusted men like Sean Carter and got hurt for it. Jay-Z's voice broke through, hoarse and desperate, as he took a step closer, his presence looming over the set. "You think you're some kind of savior, Jimmy? You think you're clean? You're just chasing clout, using these lies to make yourself look big." The accusation was weak, a last-ditch swing from a man cornered, and the crowd wasn't buying it, their boos drowning him out. Kimmel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Jay-Z's. "I don't need to look big, Sean. I just need to sleep. At night. Can you say the same? Can you look at yourself after what you did at those parties, after the lives you've damaged?" The question hung heavy, and for the first time, Jay-Z faltered, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The crowd sensed the shift, their murmurs growing louder, a tide turning against the mogul. Kimmel pressed his advantage, his voice rising with conviction. "I talked to a young man last week, someone who was at one of Diddy's parties in the Hamptons. He was 19, dreamed of being a singer, thought you were his ticket to the top. You told him to meet you upstairs, said you'd make him a star. He trusted you, Sean. He believed in you, and you left him broken." The audience gasped, some wiping tears, others shouting in outrage. Kimmel's words were a blade, cutting, deeper with every detail. "That's not a story you can spin, Sean. That's not something you can pay to disappear. That's a life, a person, someone's son." Jay-Z's face twisted, his eyes darting to the exits, but security guards blocked his path, their presence a silent warning. "You're making this up," he muttered, but his voice was barely audible, swallowed by the crowd's growing anger. The host stood, walking to the edge of the stage, his voice steady but fierce. "This ends tonight, Sean. The lies, the cover-ups, the threats. You don't get to hide behind your name anymore. The world sees you now, and they won't forget." The crowd erupted, applause and cheers thundering through the studio, a wave of support for Kimmel's stand. Jay-Z took a step, back, his shoulders slumping, the fight draining from him as the reality sank in. His empire, built on charisma and control, was crumbling under the weight of truth. Kimmel turned to the audience, his face softened but resolute. "We're not here to destroy anyone. We're here to say no more. No more silence, no more victims. We're done letting power protect the guilty." The crowd roared again, a unified cry for justice, as Jay-Z turned and walked off the set, his head bowed, the spotlight no longer his. Kimmel sat back down, the energy in the room electric but triumphant. He looked into the camera, his voice steady. "We've got a show to finish, folks, but tonight we did something bigger. We spoke up, and that's just the start." The audience cheered, a wave of emotion carrying the moment as the band struck up a new tune, signaling a return to the show but not to normalcy. Jay-Z was gone, his legacy tarnished, his power diminished. Kimmel had taken a stand, not just for himself, but for those who'd been hurt, and the crowd knew it. The truth had won, and the stage, once a battleground, now stood as a beacon of accountability, a moment the world wouldn't forget.